For more than a decade, the CIA secretly drugged American citizens with LSD. Many never knew it happened. The operation was called Operation Midnight Climax. The CIA rented apartments in San Francisco and New York City. They paid the rent. They stocked the bar. Then they hired prostitutes and told them to bring men back to those apartments. The men did not know where they were going. They did not know what was waiting for them inside. Behind the walls, federal agents watched through two-way mirrors. They had notebooks, they had recording equipment, and they had LSD, already dissolved into the drinks, being handed to men who had no idea they were part of a government experiment. The man running the operation on the ground was George Hunter White, a former narcotics agent who operated under the alias Morgan Hall. His supervisor was CIA chemist Sidney Gottlieb. The question they were trying to answer was simple. Could a person be chemically manipulated into surrendering their mind without knowing it was happening? White's method was to run the experiment on civilians in a rented apartment in San Francisco while drinking martinis behind a mirror. This was not a rogue operation. Every dollar spent was approved. Every receipt was filed. The United States government knew exactly what was happening in those rooms. On April 13, 1953, CIA Director Allen Dulles authorized Project MKUltra. The stated purpose was behavioral modification research. The actual purpose was simpler. Find a drug that could break a person open, force them to talk, erase what they knew, turn them into something the agency could use. The Cold War was the justification. Reports had reached Washington that the Soviet Union was developing its own chemical interrogation program. The CIA believed it was already behind. That belief removed every limit. Sidney Gottlieb was the man Dulles chose to run it, a biochemist with a doctorate from Caltech, a club foot he had carried since birth. Gottlieb was described by colleagues as brilliant, meticulous, and entirely indifferent to the ethical consequences of his work. He reported directly to the director. His budget was essentially unrestricted. His methods were his own. One of those methods was George Hunter White. White had spent years as a federal narcotics agent, building informant networks, operating in environments where results mattered more than rules. Gottlieb brought him in as a consultant in the early 1950s. White took an alias, Morgan Hall, and went to work. The first safe houses were in Greenwich Village, New York. White administered LSD, knockout drops, and marijuana to people brought to him through informants and street contacts, then observed what happened. The question was not whether LSD worked, it was whether it could be delivered without the subject knowing, and whether that subject could then be guided or made to reveal what they knew. The results were inconclusive. White kept going. In 1955, the operation moved to San Francisco. The CIA rented an apartment at 225 Chestnut Street in the Marina District with a view of the bay. A second location followed in Mill Valley. White oversaw the interior himself. He hung Toulouse-Lautrec prints, framed French can-can dancers, stocked the liquor, then installed what the operation actually required: two-way mirrors, hidden microphones, recording devices behind the walls, an FM antenna on the roof, a portable toilet so agents could remain at their posts through the night. The prostitutes were recruited and placed on the CIA payroll. Their instructions were straightforward: bring men back to the apartment. The LSD was already in the drinks. The agents watched from behind the mirrors and wrote down what they saw. The men who walked through that door had no idea. The CIA had designed the operation specifically around subjects who would be, in the language of one internal document, too embarrassed to report what had happened to them. Subproject 42 was initiated in January 1955. Its budget was renewed every year. In 1959, funding was increased from $6,000 annually to $10,000. The surviving financial records tell the story in receipts: surveillance equipment, recording devices, lockpicks. A document dated July 27, 1955, records the framing of Toulouse-Lautrec posters for the apartment walls. Another is a telephone bill with a handwritten note attached. Call made by addicted prostitute while under covert observation, necessary in connection with undercover operations. In 1963, CIA Inspector General John Ehrman produced a report recommending the safehouses be shut down. He described the unwitting drug testing as ethically indefensible. Gottlieb and his superior Richard Helms argued for continuation. The operation was scaled back. San Francisco closed in 1965. New York followed in 1966.
Frank Olson was not supposed to be part of this story. He was an Army scientist, a researcher at Fort Detrick, Maryland, working on aerosol delivery systems for biological agents. In November 1953, he attended a CIA retreat at a cabin in western Maryland. Gottlieb added LSD to the liquor without telling anyone at the table. Olson was one of the men drinking. In the days that followed, he became withdrawn, disoriented, unable to function. The CIA noticed. They sent him to New York with a handler. 9 days after the dosing, Olson fell from the window of his room on the 13th floor of the Statler Hotel. The CIA doctor assigned to monitor him said he had been asleep in the other bed. The death was ruled a suicide. When Olson's body was exhumed in 1994, forensic analysis found evidence of a blow to the head that predated the fall. His family pursued the case for decades. No one was ever charged. A scrap of paper was found in his pocket the night he died. On it were the initials G.W. and the address of George White's safe house. In 1973, CIA Director Richard Helms ordered the destruction of all MKUltra files. The order was carried out. Most of the record was gone. What survived did so by accident. Approximately 20,000 documents misfiled in a financial records building, untouched during the purge. A Freedom of Information Act request uncovered them in 1977. The Senate hearings that followed brought the program into the public record for the first time. Sidney Gottlieb testified. He described MKUltra's purpose as an attempt to investigate whether and how it was possible to modify an individual's behavior by covert means. When senators asked what the agency had learned from 2 decades of experiments on unwitting human beings, Gottlieb said he could not recall. He said this repeatedly. He had destroyed the records 2 years earlier. He was never prosecuted. He left the CIA in 1973 and lived out the remainder of his life without consequence. He died in 1999.
George Hunter White had died in 1975 before the hearings. In a letter written to Gottlieb shortly before his death, White described his years running the safe houses in his own words. He wrote that it had been fun, fun, fun. He asked where else a red-blooded American boy could lie, kill, cheat, steal, deceive, rape, and pillage with the sanction and blessing of the All-Highest. The letter was not meant to be read by anyone outside the agency. It survived because the financial records did. The men who walked into those apartments in San Francisco and New York were never identified. They were never told what had been done to them. No compensation was offered. No formal acknowledgement was made. The full scope of what occurred inside those rooms does not exist in any surviving file. In 1976, President Gerald Ford signed an executive order prohibiting drug experimentation on human subjects without their written and witnessed consent. The order came 23 years after Gottlieb began, 11 years after White closed the door on 225 Chestnut Street for the last time and walked away. No one who designed, funded, approved, or operated Midnight Climax was ever held criminally accountable for what happened in those rooms. Not one.